Drip, 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 all along the edge of the corrugated iron roof. Drip, drip, all in a line. Large determined drops of rain fell on the ground as if they were competing. They made little holes, little basins, scoop-like. Drip. That fat one was transparent and clear. Down it fell into the small basin its sisters had patiently helped to make. It struck the pool of water in the hole, and muddy water jumped up, forming an impatient cone-shaped pillar. And all along the ground, the cones jumped up like soldiers marking time. The grass outside, which for a long time had been scorched and sickly, was now beginning to wake up refreshed. And the rain came down in a fury, the straying thin showers forming a misty cloudiness so you could hardly see a few yards away. The jumping cones were doing it faster and faster. Soon the dripping stopped and was replaced by jets of water from the roof. They carried on the race. As Waiyaki stood at the door of his office, his left foot on the lower strut and supporting himself with his hands held firmly against the side frames, he watched the slanting raindrops meditatively. The barrack-like mud-walled building made of halls and thatch could vaguely be seen through the misty rain, standing as it had done for about 3 years now. This was all the school, his office plus the building, which was divided into 4 classrooms. Waiyaki knew only too well what was happening inside. The rotting grass thatch was no deterrent to rain. Numerous pools of water must have already formed on the floor. This was the price of education thirsty children had to pay. Probably they were all huddled together in groups, shivering, maybe in a dry corner. The lucky ones had something to cover their heads with. Inside the office, his fellow teachers Kamau and Kinuthia were arguing over something. Both were sitting on the podo table as was their custom. They came there because the office was also the staff room. Whenever they had a meeting, a talk, an argument, or sometimes a quarrel, they came here. They talked politics, religion, women, anything. On the floor at the 2 corners nearest the door were 2 heaps of miscellaneous objects. The office was also the storeroom. The school equipment was stored there. It was almost hopeless to try and keep things in proper order for any length of time. The rain poured on. Waiyaki watched, thinking confusedly about the school and the country of the sleeping lions. The country could now no longer be called isolated. Since the alienation of all the land in the hills and ridges around Siriana to white settlers, the country of the sleeping lions was like any other part of the Gikuyu country. As his father had once told him, the arm of the white man was long. The conquest of the hills was well underway. Some people already working on the alienated lands to get money for paying taxes. "It is bad," Kinuthia was saying. "I say the white man should go back to wherever he came from and leave us to till our land in peace." The rest was drowned by the falling rain. It was as if Kinuthia were commenting on the thoughts passing through Waiyaki's mind. Kinuthia was normally calm, but when he had an argument, his slow-moving eyes would change and dance with excitement. Then he would speak, waving his arms in the air. A short man with his powerfully built shoulders and a determined little chin, he had a way of forcing his point home more by the vehemence of his voice than by cool logic. The political discussions held in the office were a sign of what was happening all over the ridges. There was indeed a growing need to do something. This feeling had been strengthened by this most recent alienation of land near Siriana, forcing many people to move from places they had lived in for ages, while others had to live on the same land working for their new masters. The break with Siriana made the situation worse and inflamed the people the more. They felt the bite of injustice. Some felt the ridges had slept for far too long. Shege's warnings were now recalled, and people wished they had responded to the call in the very early days. Small organizations sprouted in the hills. Waiyaki always found himself involved. Already they had come to see him as a leader, and they instinctively turned to him for small things. But Waiyaki was always worried by the thoughts of the ever-widening gulf between Joshua's followers and the breakaway elements. Waiyaki's heart warmed toward Kinuthia, but he could never feel the same warmth for Kamau. Kamau, the son of Kabonyi, once Joshua's follower, and now the leading man among those who had broken ties with Siriana, was thin and tall, but probably he was not as tall as many people had expected when he was a boy. His eyes, however, retained the same strained look. Waiyaki never liked the way Kamau looked at him, with his small sunken eyes, their white flecked brown. They gave him that appearance of cunning that Waiyaki detested. Kamau did not like him either. A young man who rises to leadership is always a target of jealousy for his equals, for those older than himself and for those who think they could have been better leaders. Kamau was a neat man with his hair always close cropped, but there seemed to be something uncanny, something almost inhuman in his neatness. The rain came down with greater vigor. The heated argument still went on, and Waiyaki contemplated the rain and the country, the edges of his thoughts becoming blurred. "Suppose your father—" "We are not talking about my father," Kamau interrupted. Waiyaki turned his head slightly and detected a frown on Kinuthia's face. There was a tense atmosphere in the room. Then suddenly Kinuthia laughed. He was joined by Kamau. Long ago these two had fought on the question of fathers. "You should be patient, Kamau," Waiyaki put in. He too was joining in the laughter. Kinuthia resumed almost at once. "Of course, I mean your father as an example. For example, you see. I shall take my father for example, if you like. He is the head of the family. Suppose another man, Karanja or Njuguna for example, comes in and we offer him hospitality. Suppose after a time he deposes my father and makes himself the head of the family with the right to control our property. Do you think he has any moral right to do it? Do you, Waiyaki? And do you think I am bound by any consideration to obey him? And if conditions become intolerable, it lies with me to rebel, not only against him, but also against all that is harsh, unfair, and unjust. Take Syriana mission, for example. The men of God, they came peacefully. They were given a place. Now see what has happened. They have invited their brothers to come and take all the land. Our country is invaded. This government post behind Makuyu is a plague in our midst. And this heart tax? He was exhausted. He looked around defiantly and yet sorrowfully. Then he began to breathe hard. He was becoming excited again. He waved his hands in the air and then gave a thud on the table. He let his eyes roll around as if he was speaking at a big political rally. Waiyaki had never seen Kinuthia like this before. And why should they, who had been educated in Syriana, be so vehement against it? It was just like his father, who had sent him to the mission to which he had all his life objected. Perhaps life was a contradiction. Waiyaki felt something stir in him as he listened to Kinuthia. Perhaps Kinuthia was speaking for the sleeping lions, for the whole of Gikuyu country. Then he suppressed the feeling and thought of the new drive in education. Perhaps this was the answer to a people's longings and hopes. For a moment, he became lost in his contemplation of education and the plans he had in mind. "Come, Waiyaki, tell us about this new Kiama." It was Kamau who asked. Waiyaki lost his vision, but he still watched the rain. This rain was a blessing, and the famine which people had feared will come if the drought had continued will now be averted. From the scoops flowed little narrow streams that rained through the grass. They mingled and flowed on to join the main stream like a small river, like Honia, or like a flood. Only this one would end and Honia River would forever flow. And the small river went down, making a small murmuring sound, talking to itself or to the ground. Noah's flood, Waiyaki thought. Kinuthia spoke. "Yes, I think such a Kiama to preserve the purity of our tribal customs and our way of life should be formed now." Waiyaki had heard about this Kiama. He knew the drive came from Kabonyi. Waiyaki feared they would give him a place in the leadership of this Kiama, which was meant to embrace all the rages. He did not feel enthusiastic about it. He wanted to concentrate on education. Perhaps the teaching of Livingstone that education was of value and his boys should not concern themselves with what the government was doing or politics had found a place in Waiyaki's heart. It rained on, the downpour almost slashing the sun-scorched grass. What was it? And still it rained, with the little streams gathering and joining together. He saw what they were doing, carrying away the soil, corroding, eating the earth, stealing the land. And that was the cry on every ridge. Perhaps the sleeping lions would sleep no more, for they were all crying for the soil. The earth was important to the tribe. That was why Kinuthia and others like him feared the encroachment of the white men. They feared what had happened in Kiambu, Nyeri, and Murang'a. The new settlers and Siriana wore the same face, and Waiyaki was thinking, was Mugu wa Kifiro right? One day the white man would go, and for a time Waiyaki remembered his father and that prophecy. Suddenly he became angry, not with the white man or Kinuthia. He was angry with the rain. The rain carried away the soil, not only here but everywhere. That was why land in some parts was becoming poor. For a time he felt like fighting the rain. The racing drops of water had turned to filth and mud. He subsided. He now felt like laughing heartily. Even here, in this natural happening, he could see a contradiction. The rain had to touch the soil. That touch could be a blessing or a curse. Waiyaki was a man of strong emotional moods. The rain stopped. The little streams continued carrying away the soil. Now it was time to break up. The whole afternoon had been wasted. There was no way out. It had always to be like this. He would speak with the elders and see what could be done about the roof. I think we had better let the children go, Waiyaki told the others. Kamau, will you tell them to bring jembes and spades tomorrow? We might think of mudding the building now that it has rained and there is plenty of water. The building certainly needed this. Even from where he stood, he could see big gaping holes along its rugged sides. The bell, a piece of iron hanging outside by a string, was struck. A few minutes later, cries and shouts of children could be heard everywhere. School was over for the day.